Just as I was on the brink of death from a terminal illness, I was handed a mission by the system. If I could raise the affection level of the target to 100%, I would be granted a new lease on life. Determined, I poured all my efforts into the task, enduring through 8 lives of relentless struggle, and finally managed to raise the affection level to 99%. Yet as soon as I opened my eyes, I told the system, "I've decided to switch targets. Start me over. Give me someone new." The system strongly objected, asking if I had lost my mind. How could I give up when I was so close to success? But the system had no idea throughout these 8 lives, no matter what identity I assumed, Tiffany always managed to see through me. Her so-called affection level, infinitely close to 100%, was nothing more than a cruel game to her. So, in this life, I decided to let her experience what it's like to be toyed with. When I was summoned to the lakeside, a crowd of young socialites had already gathered there, watching with amusement. One sneered, "You've got to admit Miss Tiff has a certain charm. She's got a whole pack of lapdogs ready to die for her attention." Another chimed in, "Remember Chester from 6 months ago? Burned to death, all for her." Sincere added with a smirk, "This Sincere guy is even more pathetic than the last 7. He actually got down on his knees just to have a meal with her." After 4 years of trying to win over Tiffany, I was used to these whispers. At first they made me feel ashamed, hurt, and miserable. But over time, I became numb. I pushed through the crowd and walked up to Tiffany. She was comforting Ethan, but when her eyes landed on me, they turned cold. She snapped, "It's been half an hour. What could possibly be more important than what I asked you to do?" Wiping the blood from my palm, I carefully explained, "The hospital is far from here. I got here as fast as I could, but there was a car accident on the way." Before I could finish, Tiffany cut me off impatiently. "Stop making excuses. Ethan's mom's watch fell into the lake. Go fetch it." The weather was freezing, the surface of the lake coated in a thin layer of ice. Even standing at the edge in a winter coat made my feet ache from the cold. I remembered the time I drowned and my face went pale. I sighed and said, "It's so cold and I still have a high fever. If I go into the water, it could kill me. How about I buy a new watch for Ethan? Just tell me the brand." Ethan frowned and said, "That was my mom's only keepsake." Tiffany clung to his arm, her voice full of exaggerated concern. She glared at me and scolded, "Are you going to get it or not? If you don't bother showing your face to me again." She meant it. During my 3rd attempt to win her over, she demanded I give all my design works to Ethan. I refused, and she cut me off completely. By the time the 6-month mission period ended, her affection level was in the negatives. As punishment, I was in a car accident, impaled by steel rods, and bled out from severe organ damage. It was the most painful death I'd ever endured. I was terrified. My face drained of all color as I grabbed Tiffany's hand and pleaded, "I'll go. I'll fetch it right now. Please don't leave me." The system had warned me. I had to keep her affection level at 99%. Only then could I gather enough points to switch to a new target. Without further hesitation, I took off my coat and, amidst the jeers of the crowd, jumped into the lake. The water was freezing, cutting into me like knives. Just before I blacked out, I thought I heard a panicked female voice calling my name. It wasn't Tiffany. It was unfamiliar. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The first thing I saw was a message from Tiffany. "When you're awake, come home and cook for Ethan. He wants your soup dumplings, seafood porridge, and spicy crab." Tiffany had never accepted my confession, yet she moved in with me. She called our shared space home, but I saw it as a cage. Exhausted, I called her. My voice was hoarse as I said, "I jumped into the lake with a high fever to get that watch. My body is in terrible shape. If I don't rest, it could kill me." Tiffany dismissed my words with a scoff. "So what? You've already died 7 times. What's one more? At most, you'll just come back in a new body and keep stalking me, right?" I replied, "But the pain of dying from illness isn't fake. It's real." She snorted. "Serves you right, Sincere. You took on this mission to manipulate me and deceive my feelings. You should have seen this coming. Don't think you can use this as an excuse to slack off. I'm coming to pick you up." Tiffany was always like this, spoiled, domineering, leaving no room for negotiation. She hung up before I could say another word. Holding my phone, I felt a suffocating weight in my chest. I gritted my teeth and asked the system, "Can we start the 9th mission early? I can't take this anymore." I had long since lost all hope for Tiffany. I didn't want to keep enduring this endless humiliation. It was too much. The system replied cheerfully, "Sorry, host, no can do. Just hang in there for 10 more days." I used to think time moved too quickly. I wished it would slow down, so I'd have more time to win over Tiffany and delay my inevitable death. But now, just 10 days felt longer than my entire past life. Over an hour later, Tiffany finally showed up. In reality, she had been outside the hospital room the whole time. Ever since Sincere was rushed to the hospital after collapsing, she had stayed by his side. When she sensed he was about to wake up, she left, not wanting him to think she cared too much. After all, to him, she was just part of the mission. Why should she genuinely care about him? Tiffany looked at me with a sarcastic expression and asked, "Why the face? Feeling wronged because I asked you to fish out that watch for Eddie? This is your punishment for being such a flirt, messing around with women and their feelings." I had long stopped caring about her opinion of me, but I was worried about her approval rating dropping, so I explained, "I've never had inappropriate relationships with anyone." Hearing that, Tiffany thought about Sincere and Victoria together, and it made her angry. She demanded, "Victoria's dress got caught by a car, and you helped her untangle it. Isn't that flirting? If you hadn't seduced her, would a cold-hearted person like her have risked her life to jump into the lake to save you? So it was Victoria who saved me?" I froze for a moment before replying, "I barely know her. We only exchanged a few words at a party." "Don't." She rolled her eyes and interrupted, "Shut up. I don't care what you and other women are up to. But why didn't you go home to cook for Eddie when you woke up? Do you have any idea how long he's been waiting for you to come back?" I swallowed my words of explanation, lowered my head and apologized. "I'm sorry." Showing weakness was the only way to avoid the system's punishment. Tiffany scoffed, "What good is an apology? Get up and come home with me now." I sighed and reluctantly agreed, "Fine." However, when I tried to get up, my hands trembled and I couldn't even sit upright. Tiffany instinctively reached out to support me, but still mocked, "Oh, keep pretending. Go ahead." A nurse doing her rounds walked in and couldn't hold back her disapproval. She scolded Tiffany, "He has pneumonia and a fever. He needs to stay in the hospital. Why are you insisting he get up? Don't you know he's so weak that he needs help even to eat?" Tiffany turned red from the reprimand, a flicker of guilt flashing in her eyes. She muttered, "You're so sick and you didn't say anything. I thought you were just putting on an act again." Feeling numb, I replied, "I'm sorry, it's my fault. After all, between the two of us, I was always the one who had to bow my head. Seeing me like this only irritated her more." She frowned, gave up on forcing me to cook, and ordered takeout instead, planning to feed me herself. But before the first spoonful of porridge reached my lips, Ethan called. Tiffany frowned and answered, "What did you do? Burn yourself while cooking? Wait, I'll be there." In her hurry, she spilled the scalding porridge all over me. I winced in pain, but she didn't even notice as she rushed out of the room. Her close friend Crystal was waiting just outside the door, having seen it all. "Tiff, sometimes I really don't get you. You clearly care about Sincere, but you only see Eddie as a brother. So why do you keep treating Sincere like this for Eddie's sake?" Tiffany paused, her expression darkening. "You don't understand. The first time Sincere pursued me, he acted like he really loved me. He completely fooled me. But during his second attempt, I realized he was only approaching me for the mission. I can't even tell if his feelings are real or fake anymore. It's only when I see him suffer for Eddie, when he's willing to throw away his dignity and risk his life to please me, that I can convince myself he truly loves me." Crystal sighed. "Aren't you afraid that treating him this way will lead to something terrible happening? or that he'll lose all hope and leave you for good. Don't regret it later." Without hesitation, Tiffany replied, "He won't. Sincere has the system. He can't die, and he'll never leave me." Of course, she didn't share these thoughts with Crystal. Instead, she said simply, "Let's not talk about him. Eddie's burned himself. Let's go." Back in the hospital room, I eventually hired a nurse to help clean me up and feed me. Lying back in bed after eating, I found myself regretting, yet again, ever agreeing to the mission. In my original world, I was a sickly person who died at 18. Desperate for a chance to live like a normal human being, I agreed to the system's terms to complete mission objectives. But I never imagined that this would be the start of my true misery. The sudden vibration of my phone interrupted my thoughts. Seeing Tiffany's name on the caller ID made me instinctively recoil, but I still picked up immediately. "Tiffany, do you need something?" On the other end, Ethan's malicious voice came through. "Not much, really. Just thought I'd ask you to kneel and bark like a dog. Oh, and maybe roll around in the mud like a pig." In my 8 attempts to win over Tiffany, spanning 3 years, 11 months, and 15 days, I'd lost count of how many times I'd been humiliated. But no matter how many times it happened, I could never get used to it. The words of anger I wanted to hurl at him were on the tip of my tongue, but I swallowed them back down. Tiffany's sharp voice followed. "Eddie's talking to you. Are you mute?" Gripping my phone tightly, I felt a wave of anger and helplessness wash over me. Struggling to control my emotions, I said, "Tiffany, I'm a person too. Isn't this kind of humiliation too much?" She snapped. "Oh, so you're not listening to me now? Fine. Don't bother coming to find me ever again." Without hesitation, she hung up. In truth, I didn't want to see her again, but I had no choice but to keep trying to please her. Only by maintaining her approval rating at 99% could I exchange it for a new target for the mission. I clenched my teeth and called her back. "I'm sorry, I was wrong earlier. About Ethan's request." "I'll do as you say," Tiffany said coldly. "You should have agreed earlier. Did you really have to put on such a show? Turn on the camera. Let's start." I took several deep breaths, forcing a single word from my throat. "Okay. Just 10 more days." I just needed to endure 10 more days, and I could finally be free of Tiffany. I turned on the camera and reluctantly knelt on the ground, suppressing the intense shame welling up inside me. Several times I thought about following Ethan's instructions, but the humiliation was too much to bear. I just couldn't do it. On the other end, there was a burst of laughter and jeering. "Hurry up! What are you doing?" Amidst the noise, a light, clear female voice suddenly cut through. "It's just a game. There's no need to humiliate someone like this," the woman said. "Miss Tiff, Ethan, know when to stop." Tiffany's expression darkened. She looked at me through the camera. "You must be something special to have Victoria speak up for you." Ethan frowned. I thought Sincere would play along with me. I was hoping not to lose this round of truth or dare. Turns out he can't even take a little joke. If Chester hadn't died in that fire, he definitely would have agreed. Tiffany hung up the call and sent me a flurry of messages. "Sincere, why did Victoria speak up for you? Are you only approaching me because of the system's tasks? Do you like someone else? Do you like Victoria? You have 5 minutes to explain yourself." Even through the screen, I could imagine her anger. But I had barely interacted with Victoria. Our conversations added up to no more than 3 sentences. What was there to explain? I felt frustrated beyond words, but I didn't want Tiffany's favorability to drop, so I explained myself at length. An hour later, she finally replied, "Stay away from Victoria from now on." And then, as an afterthought, she added, "Even without Victoria, I wouldn't make you kneel and bark like a dog. Ethan was just joking with you. Let's not dwell on it." As for that last part, I didn't believe a word of it. In her eyes, Ethan's whims always came first. This wasn't the first time they'd humiliated me. I threw my phone aside and slumped to the ground, staring blankly at the fruit knife nearby. The system's voice chimed in. "Host, don't think about using suicide to prematurely end your tasks. If you die, It will be considered task evasion. You will be resurrected and forced to continue, experiencing the pain of death all over again. I smirked. You're overthinking it, system. I've lasted 4 years. I can handle 10 more days. I tugged at the corners of my mouth, but there was no joy behind my smile, only despair. In my original world, I had friends and family, but here for the past 4 years I'd been reduced to this. All I wanted was for Tiffany to leave me alone for the remaining 10 days. But fate never grants such wishes. 3 days later, just as I was starting to recover in the hospital, Tiffany sent me an address along with 2 curt words, "Come over." I arrived to find her with Ethan just after a matchmaking date. Her expression was dark and brooding. "Ethan," she said, her voice low, "do you really not understand how I feel about you?" Ethan frowned. "Tiffy, you never used to be this unreasonable. What's gotten into you?" He looked flustered and confused. Tiffany's anger seemed to deflate. "All right, I understand now, Ethan. I won't force you anymore. I'm sorry." They hugged tightly. I stood there, watching. Once, this scene would have broken my heart. Now I just felt numb and exhausted. As Tiffany listed all the flaws of Ethan's matchmaking date and sent him off in his car, she turned to look at me, still in a daze. "Why don't you get jealous or angry anymore?" she asked, her tone unhappy. I hesitated. "What? You heard me. When I'm good to Ethan, why don't you get mad? Before, when I ignored you to be with Ethan, you'd get upset, argue with me. Now you act like nothing happened." Tiffany stared at me, her gaze proud but tinged with an underlying anxiety. I lowered my eyes to hide the mockery in them. "Because I've figured it out. Who you like, who you're good to, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I like you. That's enough." "Really?" She looked skeptical. I simply replied, "Yes, of course it was a lie. I only said it to avoid her losing favorability." Tiffany snorted coldly. "At least you're smart enough to know your place. Come with me." "All right." I followed her to the car, staring silently out the window, lost in thought. Truthfully, in the beginning, I had genuinely loved Tiffany. The first time I took on a task as part of the system, I had just entered college. My role was to be her classmate. Tiffany was the campus queen, a goddess who treated me with remarkable kindness. When my duet partner for the New Year's Eve piano performance fell ill, Tiffany volunteered to take her place. When I was injured during a basketball game, she helped me to the hospital and cared for me until I recovered. In my original world, I grew up in hospital wards and rarely interacted with peers of the opposite sex. It was inevitable that I developed feelings for her. But once I'd fallen for her completely, I discovered the truth. She'd only been using me to provoke Ethan. Ethan was Tiffany's childhood friend, raised in her family home. He was the one she truly cared about. Finding out the truth devastated me. I argued with Tiffany, but I couldn't let her go. Now, after 4 years of her torment and 7 deaths, whatever love I once had for Tiffany had been replaced by hatred and pain. Thankfully, it would all be over soon. The car stopped in front of an exclusive club. Tiffany went straight to her private suite. She was in a foul mood and ordered a lot of alcohol, insisting I drink with her. Every time Ethan disappointed her, she'd do this. I held up my glass and explained, "I'm still recovering from pneumonia. I need to take my medication." It wasn't the best time for drinking, but Tiffany was already furious. "Sincere," she snapped. "Is this what you call love? You can't even have a single drink for me. Your so-called love is so cheap. After all this time of clinging to me, do you even truly love me, or is it just some ridiculous mission of yours?" Her voice rose, trembling with anger, her eyes bloodshot. Tiffany's thoughts churned. Was Sincere just waiting for her to reach 100% affection for him, so he could claim completion of his so-called mission and then leave her forever? I was utterly fed up, but for the sake of her affection score, I had no choice but to play along. "Fine, I'll drink," I said, forcing a smile. "This isn't about some mission. I truly love you." Even I could barely stomach the lies spilling from my mouth. I grabbed the glass, tipped my head back, and downed the drink in one go. The alcohol burned fiercely, clawing at my insides and making my stomach spasm. I winced, unable to hide the pain. Only then did Tiffany finally smile, handing me another glass. "Keep drinking," she said, "until you're drunk." As she started mumbling, her walls came down. "Sincere," she murmured. "Do you think he really loves me? He said I'm amazing and exactly his type, but he had ulterior motives for getting close to me. I can't tell if he truly loves me. Every time I see him with other women, even if he's just saying a word to them or giving them a smile, I can't take it. I don't even know how I'm supposed to feel about him anymore." Tiffany's drunkenness brought her true emotions to the surface, but even then, she spoke in riddles, never naming names. She didn't want Sincere to know that the man she cared about so deeply was him. She had always been the goddess everyone chased after, the head turner in every room. She couldn't bear the idea of liking someone who didn't love her back, let alone someone who only saw her as a mission to complete. Tiffany had made up her mind she wouldn't let Sincere succeed in his mission. That way, even if he didn't love her, he would have no choice but to stay by her side forever. My head was spinning, my stomach twisting violently. I clung to the edge of the trash can, retching until my vision blurred. Suddenly, Tiffany leaned in and wrapped her arms around me. "Sincere," she whispered, "thank God you'll never leave me. If you did, I'd lose my mind." I lowered my gaze, masking the mockery in my eyes. Who said I wouldn't leave? It was only because her affection score had been too low during the past 7 attempts that I couldn't switch to a new mission target. That was the only reason I'd been stuck with her for so long. Tiffany didn't hold me for long, though, because Ethan called. "Eddie," she chirped, "you want me to cook for you? I'll bring him over right now." Just moments ago, she'd been drowning her sorrows over Ethan's matchmaking plans, but now her mood had done a complete 180. She was positively glowing. She made me take some hangover medicine and ordered me to clean up and change clothes. "Eddie doesn't like the smell of alcohol," she said. "Make sure you clean yourself up properly. Don't ruin his appetite." I was already weak, but Tiffany suddenly shoved me hard. I stumbled, barely catching myself on the banister before I tumbled down the stairs entirely. Gritting my teeth, I said, "You should have pushed harder. Maybe then I'd have fallen and died right here." Tiffany looked startled but refused to back down. "A normal person might die, but not you. Besides, who told you to drag your feet?" In her eyes, my death was the least significant thing in the world, less important even, than making sure her beloved's dinner was perfect. I felt a wave of pity for my past self. "Yeah," I said bitterly. "I'm looking forward to it too, dying, I mean. At least then I'd finally be free of you." She scoffed. "Stop trying to scare me with that nonsense. You told me yourself when you were drunk, I'm your mission target. Even if you die, you'll just come back to find me again." Her words struck a nerve and she bent forward, pointing at the jade pendant around her neck. "And don't forget this," she added. "See it? No matter what form you take, this pendant will always recognize you." The jade glimmered softly as it swayed, its light illuminating my pale face. The truth was, the first time I tried to complete Tiffany, her affection score had nearly hit 95%. I'd almost succeeded, but then I died saving her during an earthquake. The second time around, she got me drunk and confronted me. "Are you Chester?" That had been the name I used during my first attempt. I wanted to deny it, but Tiffany had tears streaming down her face. "You don't look like him," she said, "and you have no connection to his friends or family." But this pendant lit up. I knew it was you. "If it's really you, tell me the truth, please. You have no idea. I've been having nightmares every night since Chester died. Back then, I'd loved her. I didn't want to see her in pain, so I admitted everything. But from that moment on, she despised me for deceiving her. She called me a monster, something unnatural, and her attitude toward me grew colder and harsher with every passing day. To her, I was no longer even human. My chest ached as memories of the past flooded back. But Tiffany's face showed nothing but indifference and impatience. She shoved me into the bathroom. "Hurry up," she snapped. "Once you're done, we're leaving." We didn't exchange a single word during the car ride to Ethan's villa. The moment we arrived, I was put straight to work, prepping ingredients and cooking nonstop. After 3 exhausting hours, I finally managed to prepare an entire table's worth of food, but Ethan only wrinkled his nose. "Tiffy," he said, "I'm not in the mood for this cuisine. I'd rather have something spicier, maybe some Cajun flavors." Tiffany, of course, responded with her usual patience and warmth. "Sure," she said with a smile. "I'll have Sincere make something else." She lounged in Ethan's arms, watching TV, while I was ordered to clear the table and start over. I nodded numbly, dragging myself back into the kitchen. The moment I stepped inside, Tiffany let go of Ethan and frowned, her expression darkening. Ethan, meanwhile, clenched his fists as he watched her reaction. The pneumonia hadn't fully subsided, yet here I was, overexerting myself again. A high fever returned, leaving my body weak and limp. In a moment of carelessness, the kitchen knife slipped and cut my hand. Blood seeped onto the cutting board, staining it crimson. Just then, Ethan walked in. He frowned and said, "Tiffy, I heard that Sincere has quite the reputation with women. There's even talk of him catching something. Is he jealous of me? Trying to infect me with something filthy by putting his blood in the food?" Tiffany had just seen photos of me with other women on Ethan's phone moments earlier. She was already in a foul mood and snapped coldly, "Sincere, if you don't want to cook, just say so. Do you really need to resort to such underhanded tactics?" Clutching my bleeding hand, I explained, my expression wooden. "It was an accident. I didn't mean, shut up, get out. I don't want to see you here anymore." Tiffany cut me off furiously, shoving me toward the door. She felt more and more like a fool. Despite being so close to other men herself, Sincere didn't show even a hint of jealousy. He smiled and relaxed around other women, but in front of her he was always cold and lifeless. Sincere must not love her, she thought. Only she, this fool, knowing full well his love was fake, still plunged headfirst into this mess, unable to extricate herself. Weak and feverish, I stumbled and fell, twisting my ankle. Tiffany didn't even glance back, slamming the door shut in my face. Outside, heavy snow fell. The snowflakes, once pure, turned to filth and mud as they hit the ground. Shivering in the biting wind, I limped along, hugging myself for warmth. "It's okay," I told myself. "Just 7 more days. Then it'll all be over." I tried to comfort myself, forcing a smile. "Everything will be fine." By the time I reached the hotel, I was coughing uncontrollably from the cold. After checking in and collapsing onto the bed, my phone rang. It was Tiffany. "Who said you could leave? What, planning to freeze to death out there overnight?" she demanded. Not wanting to argue, I replied dismissively, "It's too cold outside. I needed a place to stay." "I need you back here, now," she ordered curtly, hanging up right after. That was just how Tiffany was, impulsive, never considering others' feelings. Taking a deep breath, I suppressed all my negative emotions and hailed a cab to return. When I arrived at the villa, Tiffany didn't even let me inside. Instead, she extended her hand toward me and said, "That pair of rings you always carry with you, Eddie really likes them. Hand them over. Consider it an apology for your blood dirtying the kitchen." My face stiffened. Those were made by my mom before she passed away. She made them for my future wedding. They're the only thing I brought with me from my original world. I've held on to them to keep going. Tiffany sneered. "You say you love me, yet you can't even part with a dead person's rings for me? Is this your so-called love? Stop making excuses. Are you giving them to me or not?" I turned pale, but I recalled my mother's final words to me, "Son, all I want is for you to live a healthy and peaceful life." Reluctantly, I took out the rings, stealing one last glance at them before handing them over to Tiffany. "Whatever you want, I'll give it to you," I said. Tiffany's expression softened as she accepted the rings. "Tomorrow's banquet, Eddie already has a date, so you'll be my escort. But tonight, Eddie is staying over at our house, so you'll need to sleep elsewhere. I don't want him getting the wrong idea about our relationship. Got it?" "Got it," I replied. From inside, Ethan's voice rang out, "Tiffy!" Tiffany immediately went back inside, leaving me shut out once again. This time, I didn't feel sad or upset. just drained and numb. Under the endless night sky, I stood at the roadside, shivering as I waited for a cab. Over and over, I prayed for time to pass faster. I was close to my limit with Tiffany. Back at the hotel, I fell into a restless sleep. Early the next morning, Tiffany called me back to the villa to change into a suit. As I was getting fitted, I noticed Tiffany holding her phone, her face growing darker by the second. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of her chat with Ethan. "Tiffy," Ethan had written, "do you think this silver-gray suit you gave me matches Miss May better? Your mom thinks Miss May is a great match for me. Honestly, I think she's pretty great too. What do you think?" Tiffany put away her phone, her gorgeous face tense with anger. She lashed out, "You come as my escort and pull that sour face? Can't even compliment my new dress? You're worthless. Can't even provide emotional value." Having taken her frustration with Ethan out on me, she finally seemed slightly calmer. I didn't want to argue, so I humored her with some compliments before continuing to try on suits. Standing in front of the mirror in a vivid blue suit, I was struck by how much it resembled one I had worn in my first life. "This fits pretty well," I muttered to myself. Turning to Tiffany, I noticed her expression soften for a split second before she quickly looked away, her ears tinged red. With a stiff tone, she said, "It's passable." I must have been sleep-deprived and imagining things. I couldn't have just seen tenderness in her eyes. The system always claimed she had a 99% affection level for me, that she loved me deeply and couldn't live without me. But the reality was far from that. If she wasn't tormenting me, that was already a good day. Rolling her eyes, Tiffany snapped, "Stop daydreaming. Let's go. Ethan and Miss May are already here." She hurried me into the car, pushing me along. Tiffany and I were both strikingly attractive, so when we arrived at the banquet, the moment Tiffany entered the room, all eyes turned to her. But Tiffany ignored everyone and marched straight toward Ethan. "Eddie, these are the rings you liked. Here, take them," she said, handing the rings to him. Before doing so, she glanced at me. Noticing I was lost in thought and not paying her any attention, her gaze darkened. Ethan accepted the rings with a smug look and said, "Thanks, Tiffy. But I heard these were Sincere's mother's heirlooms. Isn't it inappropriate to just give them to me?" Tiffany sneered coldly, "If you like his things, it's his honor to give them to you." She said this without any concern for how I might feel, completely disregarding my presence. I kept my eyes down, trying to stay calm, clenching my fists tightly as if I hadn't heard her. Tiffany, however, grabbed Ethan's hand with a tender expression and said, "Eddie, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. That's something Miss Vic can never match." Ethan, still full of himself, replied, "One of you is my sister, and the other is the woman I'm going to marry someday. Why should there be any comparison?" Tiffany nodded absent-mindedly and, noticing my wandering thoughts, lost interest in putting on a show. Soon someone approached her, eager to strike up a conversation, and she left. As soon as she walked away, the whispers and jeers around me grew louder. Can't believe anyone would stoop so low. Offering up his mother's heirlooms just to win a woman's favor. Pathetic. That's nothing. Miss Tiff once told him to jump into a lake to retrieve a watch for Ethan, and he did it without hesitation. If I had a son like that, I'd die of shame. The word stung, and I wanted to leave. But before I could, Ethan caught up to me. "Why are you guys always like lapdogs, wagging your tails and groveling at Tiffy's feet? Do you really think Tiffy moved in with you because she likes you? She was just using you to make me jealous after she saw me going on dates." Ethan spat venomously, dropping his usual cheerful facade. I nodded calmly and replied, "Yeah, I know. That's why I gave up on Tiffany a long time ago." But Ethan wouldn't let it go. "You've been parading around with those rings like there's something special. I just casually mentioned to Tiffy that I wanted them, and she handed them over without a second thought. Who knew they belonged to a dead person? Just thinking about it gives me the creeps." With that, Ethan pulled out the rings and flung them toward the window. My face turned pale. "Stop!" I shouted. Outside the window was a cliff, with a river flowing far below. If the rings were thrown, they'd be lost forever. I lunged forward trying to grab them, but Ethan shoved me hard to the ground. Then he sat down dramatically and started yelling. "Tiffy." Sincere tried to take the rings from me and threw them out the window. He even tried to push me down the cliff. I was so scared I thought I'd never see you again. When I turned around, there she was, Tiffany, her face flushed with anger. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the ground for support, and quickly tried to explain. "Tiffany, I didn't push him." He threw away my mother's heirloom, and before I could finish, Tiffany slapped me hard across the face. "Sincere, how dare you lay a hand on Eddie?" she demanded. In her mind, I had deceived her feelings and hurt someone she cared about. Fighting to keep my emotions in check, I gritted my teeth. "That's not true." I started, but she cut me off. "Still denying it?" she yelled, landing another slap across my face. I held my swollen cheek, swallowing my anger and humiliation. My voice cracked as I said, "Tiffany, do you enjoy humiliating me repeatedly just because I once liked you? Does this amuse you?" Her expression turned even colder. "You're not worthy of the word like. Hearing it from someone like you makes me feel dirty. You claim to like me, yet you're out there trying to contact Victoria. Do you honestly think she'd even look at you?" I was on the verge of breaking. "I only reached out to Victoria to thank her for saving me," I said earnestly. But Tiffany didn't believe a word. She turned her back on me and walked over to Ethan, gently helping him up. "Don't be scared, Eddie. I'm here. I'll make sure Sincere pays for this," she said, her voice soft with concern. Ethan played the victim perfectly, his eyes red as if he'd been bullied. "It's fine, Tiffy. Sincere just insulted me, tossed the rings, and knocked me over. That's all," he said with exaggerated innocence. "You're too kind. That's why you get pushed around," Tiffany replied coldly. Supporting Ethan, she walked up to me. Her face was icy as she warned, "You'd better pray nothing happens to Eddie." With that, they left. As Ethan passed me, he gave me a smug grin. The other guests pointed and whispered, their words cutting deep. How despicable. Clinging to Miss Tiff is bad enough, but to hurt Ethan, shameless and vile. No wonder Miss Tiff doesn't want anything to do with him. Handsome, sure, but so toxic. I didn't even have time to defend myself before I was thrown out of the estate. The mansion was perched on a mountainside, and with no invitation, I couldn't even call a ride. Wearing only a thin suit and dress shoes, I braced myself against the biting wind and started walking downhill. My feet were soon bloodied and raw. As I neared the base of the mountain, a car sped toward me. Through the window, I saw several burly men inside, and a sense of dread washed over me. Instinctively, I turned and ran, but how could I outrun a car? The vehicle caught up and men leapt out. Before I could react, a blow landed on the back of my head. I let out a cry and blacked out. When I came to, it was early the next morning. I was lying on the floor of a private room, surrounded by 6 or 7 men, all with menacing expressions. Standing at the front of the group was Ethan. "Hey, Ethan, he's awake," one of them said. Ethan stormed towards me, grabbing my collar, and before I could react, he threw a punch straight at my face. "Damn it! What kind of charm did you put on Tiffy?" he snarled. Before any of those pathetic guys hanging around her, she'd drop them at my word. But yesterday, you humiliated me at the banquet, and when I told her to make you leave, she outright refused. She's never done that before. My face burned from the impact of his punch, but I wasn't surprised. In fact, I half expected this. I was furious but also terrified, trying hard to suppress my emotions. "Mr. Ethan," I said, forcing calm into my voice, "there's no need for this. I'll be gone in a few days. You'll never have to see me again, nor will Tiffany." Before I could finish, another fist landed on my face. Grinding his teeth, Ethan sneered, "Do you take me for an idiot? Tiffy could make you jump into a frozen lake with just one word. There's no way someone like you would leave willingly." He gestured to a group of men behind him. "You know what to do. Don't kill him, just ruin him. Make sure he can never be a man again. Let's see if Tiffy still wants him after that." With that, Ethan turned and walked away. He could have had me beaten to death, but no, he chose this, to rob me of my dignity as a man. He hated me that much. My teeth ground together in fury as I watched him leave. I thought about escaping but was immediately kicked to the ground. My body slammed onto the floor, my teeth cut into my lip, filling my mouth with blood. The pain was so overwhelming that I couldn't even get up. I was yanked to my feet, forced to lift my head as one of the men chuckled. "Sincere, isn't it? Don't say we're being unfair. Mr. Ethan gave you a chance, 3 calls to Miss Tiff. She's just in the next room. If you can convince her to come save you, we won't lay a finger on you." The leader, a burly man, shoved a phone into my hand. "Go ahead, call her." I stared at the phone, the pre-dialed number glaring back at me. The pain coursing through my body sobered me up. Between Tiffany's erratic personality and the police, the latter seemed like the safer bet. While the men weren't paying attention, I dialed 911. But before the call could connect, someone noticed. "You son of a bitch, trying to be clever, huh?" Fists and feet rained down on me, and it felt like my body was breaking apart. Curled up on the ground, I begged for mercy. "Stop, please stop, I'll call Tiffany, I swear." The phone was shoved back into my hand. Wiping the blood from the corner of my mouth, I sat up and dialed Tiffany. The first call, no answer. The second, still no answer. By the third, the men were already closing in, ready to pin me down. I had endured so much heartbreak and humiliation in my attempts to win Tiffany over, but this was a new level of despair. Desperate, I muttered under my breath, "Pick up, Tiffany. Please, I'm begging you, pick up." Maybe my prayers worked because she finally answered. "What is it?" she asked, her tone casual. "Tiffany, help me," I shouted. "I'm in the next room, they've tied me up and—" Before I could finish, Tiffany burst out laughing. "Oh, Sincere, you're too funny. What kind of nonsense are you talking about? Are you a giant orange cat or something being dragged away to be neutered? If you were a cat, maybe I'd believe you." I was speechless. Gritting my teeth, I said firmly, "I'm not joking, Tiffany. This is serious. If you don't believe me, just come to the next room and see for yourself." Her laughter only grew louder. All right. You're just jealous because I'm confessing to Ethan today, aren't you? That's why you're making up this ridiculous story." "I swear I'm not. I'm begging you, Tiffany, just give me 3 minutes." 3 minutes and—" She cut me off. "Stop it, Sincere. It's not funny anymore. You embarrassed Ethan at the banquet yesterday, and now you're trying to ruin his birthday party? Jealousy is one thing, but this is too much." The phone was on speaker, and everyone heard her words. The men closed in, pinning my legs down as one of them pulled out a pair of scissors. My phone was knocked aside. I had never felt such hopelessness. Struggling against their grip, I screamed, "Get away from me, Tiffany, I'm begging you, help me." The call was still connected, and Tiffany's amused voice came through. "You sound just like when I took my orange tabby to get neutered. Relax. It didn't actually happen in the end. Anyway, stop playing around. I'll come find you after the party's over." The call ended. My heart sank into the abyss. Summoning all my strength, I kicked the man holding the scissors. My other foot struck a cabinet, sending a vase crashing onto the head of another man. The others were momentarily stunned. "Boss, are you okay?" one of them shouted. Taking advantage of the chaos, I broke free and bolted for the door, clutching my waistband. Across the hallway, Tiffany's room was open. I screamed her name, hoping against hope for help. She was sitting beside Ethan, looking happier than I'd ever seen her. She didn't even glance in my direction. Behind me, the burly man, now with blood streaming down his face, charged after me. "You think you can mess with me and get away with it? I'll ruin you. I'll make a video of it and show the world." Cornered against the balcony railing, I knew I couldn't fight them off. Desperate, I glanced down and thought about jumping. "System," I asked silently, "if I jump, is it considered suicide?" "No," the host replied. Relieved, I murmured, "Good." The red bracelet on my wrist concealed a hidden camera, capturing everything. The recording from the birthday banquet revealed Ethan's self-directed drama and his attempts to find someone to harm me. Taking one last glance in Tiffany's direction, I resolutely climbed over the railing and jumped. The rapid descent and excruciating pain were unbearable, yet in my final moments I smiled. "Tiffany." I could finally free myself from her. In all the lives to come, we would never meet again. Tiffany, who was about to give her carefully prepared gift to Ethan, suddenly felt a tightness in her chest and a sense of unease. It was as if something very important was leaving her forever. "What's wrong, Tiffy?" Crystal asked curiously as she cradled her daughter. "It's nothing," Tiffany replied, frowning slightly. The unease in her heart was inexplicable. Crystal, soothing her daughter, remarked, "Are you still fretting over Sincere? Let me give you some blunt advice. You really shouldn't be using Eddie to provoke him. Using Eddie to trigger Sincere, Chester, and all those other suitors you care about. It's a flawed strategy. No matter which one you end up with, this approach is just plain wrong." "You don't understand," Tiffany retorted irritably. There was no way she could explain to Crystal that all 8 of them were in fact the same person, let alone mention anything about the system tasks. Otherwise, Crystal would think she'd lost her mind. Crystal raised an eyebrow and said, "Well, when I met my husband 2 years ago, I was honest with him from the start, and now we have a 1-year-old daughter. You should treat the person you love with sincerity, not like this." Tiffany thought about her 4 years of entanglement with Sincere, realizing their relationship had only worsened over time. This left a bitter taste in her heart. Seeing Crystal's adorable, well-behaved daughter, she couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. If she and Sincere hadn't fallen out, she might have had a child by now, too. "Forget it," Tiffany said. "I'll go give Eddie his gift first." She awkwardly changed the subject, but Crystal's words had already taken root in her mind. She thought to herself, maybe she should just agree to be Sincere's girlfriend. At worst, she'd control her feelings for him. As long as his affection score didn't max out, he'd never be able to leave her. Suppressing her tumultuous emotions, Tiffany found Ethan, who looked particularly dashing today, and handed him the birthday gift. "Etty, happy birthday," she said. When Ethan opened the gift box, it revealed a car key and a watch. The room erupted in gasps of amazement. "Whoa, a Bugatti, the most expensive model, and a brand new Rolex," someone exclaimed. "Eddie, I want a sugar sister like yours," another teased. Someone else joked, "That Sincere guy didn't show up today. If he finds out he's been chasing after Miss Tiff for so long without even earning her glance, but Ethan gets a luxury car, he'll be furious." The group laughed and bantered, encouraging kiss, kiss. Being the only daughter in her family, Tiffany had always treated Ethan like an older brother. Smiling lightly, she leaned in and gave him a quick cheek-to-cheek kiss, treating it as a casual gesture. The action carried a hint of ambiguity, though she was oblivious to the desire glimmering in Ethan's eyes. Tiffany's mind was filled with thoughts of Sincere. After the birthday party ended, she was planning to agree to be his girlfriend. It would probably make him ecstatic. Ethan gazed at her intensely, his voice tender as he said, "Tiffy." The next moment, Ethan leaned in with a smile, aiming to kiss her back, this time on the lips. Tiffany quickly dodged, and he only managed to kiss her cheek. The room burst into a mix of laughter and teasing. Tiffany frowned slightly, but chose not to comment. After the birthday song was sung and the cake was distributed, she spoke to Ethan privately. "Eddie, we're not kids anymore. Let's avoid things like kissing from now on," she said. Ethan's expression stiffened. "Tiffy, have you forgotten? We agreed to act ambiguously to provoke those men who deceived you." "That won't be necessary anymore," she replied. "Why not?" Ethan asked, clearly anxious. "You're engaged now. Behaving like this isn't good for either of our reputations," Tiffany explained. Ethan dismissed her concerns. "Who cares? As long as it helps you, these things are trivial. I don't mind at all." "I care," Tiffany said firmly. "Using you to provoke Sincere hasn't improved my relationship with him. In fact, it's only made it worse. Besides, your fiancée Monica is a decent person. You should treat her well. Don't worry about Sincere and me anymore." Her tone left no room for argument. After saying her piece, she walked away. Sincere had told her he was in the private room next door. Now that the birthday festivities were over, it was time to see him. She planned to tell him that Ethan had rejected her confession, so she decided to be his girlfriend instead. But first, he'd have to apologize to Ethan for what he did at the banquet. Ethan stared at her retreating figure, his grip on his wine glass tightening to the point of nearly shattering it. Through gritted teeth, he muttered, "Tiffy, why can't you see me? At least that fool is out of the picture now. Your world will still revolve around me." Tiffany was unaware of his thoughts as she walked out and headed to the next room. The scene inside startled her. A group of police officers was present, along with several rough-looking men being pinned to the floor. Blood was everywhere. The sight reminded her of Sincere's earlier plea for help. The unease in her heart gradually grew. Her face turned pale as she asked, "Where's Sincere? What happened here?" The young officer leading the group didn't answer directly. Instead, he questioned Tiffany. "How do you know Sincere is here? What's your relationship with him?" "My relationship?" Tiffany had lived with Sincere for half a year, but to the outside world, Sincere was merely one of her admirers. She had never admitted he was her boyfriend. For a moment, Tiffany was at a loss for words. The young officer frowned and said, "If you're not related, then don't ask. We can't disclose his matters casually. This is an ongoing investigation, please Before he could finish, his superior smacked him on the head and said, "Watch your words. Step aside." The superior turned to Tiffany and apologized. "Sorry, Miss Tiff. He's new here and doesn't recognize you." He briefly summarized the situation. Half an hour ago, these people on the ground had some personal grudge against Sincere. They kidnapped him and attempted, well, let's just say they tried to humiliate him. Sincere managed to break free, but in his panic he jumped from the building and died. When these six saw what happened and realized the gravity of the situation, they called the police and surrendered themselves. He couldn't bring himself to say the harsher details. Even for seasoned officers, such bizarre cases were hard to believe. However, the exclusive club where it happened valued privacy, and there were no surveillance cameras in the hallway. Based on the suspect's confessions and the fingerprints on Sincere's legs, the police pieced together what had occurred. Tiffany went to see Sincere's body. Falling from the 10th floor, he was so disfigured that his original appearance was unrecognizable. It wasn't the first time she had witnessed his death, yet her heart still ached terribly. To endure such humiliation in one's final moments, it must have been unbearable. Ethan, suppressing his inner excitement, grabbed her arm and said, "Let's go, Tiffy. Sincere was just unlucky to encounter something so rare. You can't blame anyone else." Tiffany, in pain, replied, "But I could have saved him." Sincere had called her for help, but she thought he was staging one of his usual dramas. Crystal patted her on the shoulder and said, "What's done is done. Sincere loved you so much he wouldn't want you to be sad." Ethan chimed in, "Exactly, Tiffy. Maybe you and Sincere were just not meant to be. Your true soulmate must be someone else." Tiffany nodded. "All right, let's go." She took one last deep look at Sincere's body, exhaled, and pulled herself out of the overwhelming guilt and pain. She comforted herself. If not for this, he was so close to losing his manhood. Maybe it's better this way. Otherwise, in that state, I wouldn't have been able to accept him either. Besides, Sincere isn't truly dead. He'll come back to me. Next time he asks for help, I'll make sure to show up right away. Together, Tiffany and the others left the police station. Crystal asked worriedly, "Tiff, do you need to rest for a bit?" "No need. Today's Ethan's birthday. I can't ruin his mood," Tiffany replied without hesitation. Crystal's expression turned complicated. "You seem to care about Sincere a lot. But now that he's dead, your reaction is this? Tiff, sometimes I feel like you're so cold-hearted." Tiffany didn't bother to explain and got into the car. Only she knew that Sincere would return to her. Ethan lagged behind her, glancing at his phone. There was only one message in the chat: "Sincere's bracelet has been destroyed." Ethan raised his eyebrows and let out a sigh of relief, deleting the message as well. When Tiffany returned to Ethan's birthday party, word of Sincere's death had already spread. Many were discussing it. Someone remarked, "If Sincere knew that after his death Miss Tiff was still partying, he'd probably come back to life out of rage." Another person replied, "Miss Tiff never even liked him. He was delusional, clinging to her. He died because he asked for it. Tiffany heard these disparaging comments about Sincere countless times and didn't take them to heart. Ethan had his arm around her waist, chatting and laughing with others, while Tiffany held a wine glass, absent-minded. Her eyes constantly scanned the crowd. Perhaps Sincere had already revived and was among them. She wondered what he might look like this time. Ethan noticed her distracted state and asked, "Tiffy, are you looking for someone?" Feeling his dissatisfaction, Tiffany casually replied, "No," but her gaze continued roaming across the room. Normally, her aloof personality made her unlikely to engage with others much. But tonight, no matter who called her Miss Tiffany, she would respond immediately. However, the jade pendant around her neck remained dim, and none of the faces around her bore any resemblance to Sincere. Frustrated and irritable, Tiffany thought to herself, usually, Sincere would return to me within half a day after his death. What's going on this time? Is it because he called for help and I ignored him? Is he disappointed? She sighed. Fine. The next time I see him, I'll be nicer to him and apologize. Over the next 3 days, Tiffany attended every party she was invited to and answered every call from unfamiliar numbers. Some were trying to win her favor, some were seeking partnerships, some were offering their children for connections, and there were even scam calls. But there was no call from Sincere. When Tiffany first heard about his death and saw his body, she was indifferent. But now 3 days had passed without Sincere coming to find her, and her unease was growing. This time she was genuinely panicking. Tiffany visited Sincere's favorite bar, the Riverside where he used to take walks when he was troubled, his favorite barbecue restaurant, and even the basketball court where he vented his frustrations. The sports arena. She had been searching for a month. Every time she saw someone who bore a slight resemblance to Sincere, she would rush over, calling out his name, "Sincere!" Those people would turn their heads, revealing unfamiliar faces tinged with confusion, and ask, "Who are you? You must have mistaken me for someone else." Ethan had been following Tiffany the entire time, consumed with jealousy. At the welcome dinner hosted by the Vicky family, he frowned and said, "Tiffy, what's wrong with you? Sincere is dead. He's no longer by your side, but I'll always be here for you." He pulled Tiffany into his arms, but she pushed him away. Tiffany said, "You don't understand. Stop talking nonsense." She thought to herself, everyone else might leave me, but Sincere never would. Crystal gently tried to persuade her, "Tiffy, Sincere really is gone. Could the stress be getting to you? Maybe you should see a therapist." "I'm fine." Tiffany brushed her off, though she was feeling utterly frustrated. Usually, after Sincere's death, she only needed to wait for him to come back to her. But this was the first time she had to actively seek him out, and she couldn't find him. Even though she hadn't saved him when he died, it had been a month. Surely he wouldn't still be holding a grudge. He had bullied Eddie at the birthday banquet, and she hadn't even held it against him. Yet he seemed to always pick fights with her. The next time she saw him, she vowed to give him a good scolding. Just as this thought crossed her mind, the pendant around her neck began to glow. Her frustration dissipated, replaced by excitement. She turned around eagerly, only to see a stranger, a clean-cut, handsome man, walking toward her. The closer he got, the brighter the pendant glowed. "Sincere has found you," Tiffany whispered to herself, raising an eyebrow. She grabbed the man's hand, but the next second Victoria appeared and pried her hand away. With a displeased expression, Victoria said, "Miss Tiff, you've got the wrong person. This is my fiancé, Jordan." Tiffany ignored Victoria, her eyes fixed intently on Jordan, watching his every expression. "I don't want her answer," Tiffany said. "I want you to tell me yourself. Who are you?" Before he could respond, Tiffany clutched his arm tightly. "If you dare lie to me in front of everyone, I'll never speak to you again." Jordan frowned. "Who doesn't know that Sincere is dead? How could I be him? Miss Tiff, if something's wrong with your head, you should see a doctor. Don't embarrass yourself here." His eyes were filled with undisguised disdain and hatred, making Tiffany panic. Sincere used to look at her with deep affection, and later with sorrow. but never with such contempt. Could it be? She really had mistaken him for someone else? While she stood there in a daze, Jordan shook her off. Victoria, her face emotionless, said to Tiffany, "I'll let this slide, but if you mistake my fiancé for someone else and cause trouble again, don't blame me for being rude." With that, she walked away with Jordan. Tiffany stood rooted to the spot, still staring in Jordan's direction. Around her, people began to whisper, "Why is Miss Tiff chasing after Vicky's fiancé and calling him by the name of a dead man?" It's impressive that Miss Vic and Mr. Jordan didn't lose their temper on the spot. They've got good manners. Miss Tiff has been going around pulling random people and calling them sincere, but he's already dead. Maybe she's lost her mind from grief. Could be. Better stay away from someone so unstable. Ethan wrapped an arm around Tiffany's waist, both angry and jealous. "Tiffy, Sincere is dead. What are you doing?" But Tiffany didn't even acknowledge him. She shook him off, grabbed a drink from a waiter, and headed toward Jordan. She needed to find out, was the pendant mistaken, or was he lying? I, Sincere, should now be called Jordan. I didn't expect that after I scolded Tiffany in public, she would approach me again. She said, "I made a mistake earlier. Let me offer you a toast, Mr. Jordan, as an apology." Tiffany raised her glass to me, but I didn't even bother pretending. "I'm allergic to alcohol," I said flatly. I was never someone to play nice. In the past, I only acted subservient to her because of the system's tasks. But now, I didn't have to care about her opinion. Tiffany said, "Fine, I'll drink. Mr. Jordan doesn't need to." She downed the drink and stared at me intently. "I need to discuss something with you privately. Would you mind stepping aside for a moment?" I smirked. I would mind. Without a second thought, I rejected her. Without the system's forced tasks, I found her presence irritating. I didn't even want to pretend to be polite. Turning on my heel, I walked away. Tiffany quickly stepped in front of me to block my path. "Mr. Jordan." Before she could finish, I shoved her aside, my face full of impatience. "Shut up! Don't you understand plain English? This isn't the place for you to throw a tantrum. If you keep pestering me, I won't hold back." My voice wasn't quiet, and in an instant all eyes were on us. Victoria practically ran over, stepping in front of Tiffany with a dissatisfied expression. "You're not welcome here," she said to Tiffany. "Please leave now." Tiffany had never been so humiliated in her entire life. Her face turned bright red. She wanted to say something, but security had already approached, ready to escort her out. She shot me one last glance, her face dark, and left. Ethan ran after her, calling, "Tiffy!" After the event ended, I left with Victoria. Back at our residence, I said to her, "I'm sorry about what happened today. It was probably inappropriate of me to lose my temper with a woman at the party. For people like us, reputation is everything." But Victoria replied, "It's not your fault. Tiffany was the one harassing you, not the other way around. You harassed her, so any shame is hers to bear. And if someone lays a hand on her, it's only what she deserves." Victoria had sent me several pictures in quick succession. She said, "I've picked out 2 bodyguards for you. Here's their information. There are some things you shouldn't handle yourself, leave it to them. I trust their work." I glanced at her and asked, "Victoria, why are you so good to me? I feel like I don't deserve it." Instead of looking at the files she'd sent, I simply leaned in and kissed her cheek. Victoria froze, unsure whether to close her eyes or keep them open. Her ears flushed crimson as she stammered out a response. "I'm good to you because I should be. You're my fiancé, after all." The next moment I scooped her up in my arms. "Your hands and feet always get cold easily. Stop walking around barefoot," I said as I carried her to the couch. Sitting down, I pulled her into my lap and began warming her feet with my hands. Victoria, who was known as a cool and unapproachable CEO in public, now looked shy and delicate. "My feet are dirty," she murmured, avoiding my gaze. I smirked mischievously. "If your feet are dirty, then what should I touch, my dear Miss Vic? Here? Or maybe here?" I teased as my hands playfully moved to different spots. Embarrassed, Victoria grabbed my wandering hand, her face turning red all the way down to her neck. Do you have to touch me?" she stammered. I chuckled. Yes, Victoria was always conservative and reserved, the type who couldn't handle teasing well. I wasn't usually the teasing type either, but something about her reactions made me want to see more of her flustered expressions. She shot me a panicked glance, and when she realized I wasn't backing down, she hesitated before slowly letting go of my hand. Her eyes fluttered shut and her body trembled slightly. I couldn't hold back my laughter. "Miss Vic, why are you so obedient? It makes me want to bully you more," I said, shaking my head at how different the private Victoria was from her public persona. In a fit of embarrassment and indignation, Victoria straddled my lap and began pounding her fists against my chest, grabbing my collar as she yelled, "Take it back! Am I really that easy to bully?" I laughed, holding her wrists gently. "You kind of are, and no, I won't take it back." Our playful wrestling escalated until I pinned her beneath me. It wasn't until I noticed the hint of pale skin peeking out that I realized how intimate our position had become. Victoria's half-lowered gaze, her teeth lightly biting her lip, and the faint sheen of moisture in her eyes made my heart race. Can I kiss you, Victoria?" I asked, my voice low. "It's okay." What had started as teasing now had my own heart in turmoil. Cupping her face, I leaned in and kissed her. She melted into my arms, letting out a soft whimper as her focus seemed to blur. But just as quickly, she pushed me away with trembling hands, her face burning. She avoided my gaze entirely. I'll go make you some hangover soup," she stammered, before practically fleeing the room. I watched her retreating figure, her steps unsteady, and couldn't help but chuckle. My Victoria. She seemed so sensitive. It was a while before she returned, freshly showered. After we finished dinner, we each went to our respective rooms. "Good night, Jordan," she said softly. "Good night," I replied with a smile. Just as I was about to close my door, Victoria stopped me. She stood in the doorway, her cheeks tinged with a rosy hue, her bright eyes filled with a playful warmth. "Jordan, I'm really happy today," she said. I brushed my finger against her nose and replied, "Me too." Leaning down, I pressed a light kiss to her forehead. "Good night, Victoria, sweet dreams." Knowing her reserved nature, I didn't push her to stay. We bid each other good night and parted ways. Lying in bed, I couldn't stop smiling. This was my 9th run-through of this system's strategy mission. While I could switch targets, I couldn't choose who they were. At first, I'd been worried about ending up with someone like Tiffany again. But when I revived and saw that my new target was Victoria, I felt an immense sense of relief. The first time I'd attempted to conquer Tiffany, I died in an earthquake. After the disaster, the Linden Corporation donated $20 million to aid in the reconstruction. Victoria, the heiress of the Linden family, even led a rescue team to the disaster zone herself. It was Victoria who personally pulled my body from the wreckage that time. On my second attempt, Tiffany abandoned me on a snowy mountain in a fit of anger over Ethan. Coincidentally, Victoria was there skiing. Although she didn't know me, she still offered me a ride. The third time, Ethan and I fought over the steering wheel during a car ride, resulting in a crash. Tiffany rushed to the scene, but Ethan lied, claiming I had caused the accident. She believed him and left me severely injured on the roadside to care for Ethan, who had only minor scrapes. That time, Victoria happened to pass by. Ignoring the danger, she pulled me from the wreckage of the car, which was moments away from exploding, and rushed me to the hospital. Unfortunately, I bled out before we could get there. In each subsequent attempt, Victoria had helped me in one way or another, not out of love, but simply because she was inherently a good person. The system even told me, "We select hosts for these missions to help them resolve regrets from their previous lives and give them a second chance. The targets we choose are always outstanding individuals. Even if you fail to win them over, someone like Victoria would never harm you." I'd come to the same conclusion, and thankfully, Victoria seemed to have a favorable impression of me. Of course, I liked her too. The next morning, I had breakfast with Victoria before heading to the office together. As soon as I got out of the car, I hurried toward the building. Victoria, exasperated, pulled me back and said, "Jordan, You don't need to work yourself so hard. Balance is key, you know. I replied, I'm not tired. After all, I'm the design director. I can't be the one slacking off. She frowned and said, Who would dare say you're slacking? Victoria wasn't usually one to talk much, but whenever it came to complimenting me, she always seemed proud. Gesturing as she spoke, she said, You just started here and already came up with 2 complete sports car designs. Everyone in the design department is raving about you. Several shareholders and executives even asked me where I found such a genius. I playfully pinched her cheek and said, If I weren't excellent, how could I be worthy of our little Vicky? Victoria stood on tiptoe and kissed the corner of my lips. You're already incredibly amazing, she said softly. Just as she finished, some executives walked over, joking as they approached. Oh, don't mind us, Miss Vic and Mr. Jordan. We'll just be on our way. Quick, let's leave the lovebirds alone. Their teasing made both Victoria and me blush. We promptly parted ways, embarrassed. She went back to the car and returned with a card and a gift box. This is a supplementary black card for you, she said. And this Mercedes, when I saw it, I thought you'd like it, so I bought it for you. The keys are yours. She handed me the box as casually as one might comment on the weather. When I opened it, I was stunned to see one of the most expensive cars ever featured in the news. Isn't this a bit too extravagant? The Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR. It's worth nearly $1 billion. Victoria blinked and replied, If you like it, then it's worth it. If you don't, I can return it and get something else. I stammered, Thank you. I really like it. I lowered my head, held her chin gently, and kissed her several times, making her face turn red again. She seemed distracted even after we entered the company, while I headed to the design department in high spirits. Good morning, Director. Morning, Mr. Jordan. The designers greeted me warmly as I arrived. I smiled and nodded at them, ordering coffee for everyone. Once the team gathered, I said, If you're free tonight, let's head to Spring Haven for dinner. My treat. Consider it a little reward for your hard work. Cheers erupted. One of them exclaimed, Spring Haven is so expensive. I usually can't bring myself to eat there. Thanks, Mr. Jordan. I love you. Seeing their excitement made me happy as well. Afterward, I returned to my office to continue working on my designs. For 4 years during my pursuit of Tiffany, I had been mocked and ostracized at every turn. But in my original world, I was a renowned designer with great connections. Now that I no longer had to grovel at Tiffany's feet or endure her oppression, I was back to thriving in an environment where I truly belonged. For the rest of the week, I didn't encounter Tiffany again. Being someone so concerned with appearances, I assumed she wouldn't confront me after her humiliation at the party. However, one evening, when Victoria was away on a business trip and I was preparing to head home, I was cornered by Tiffany in the parking garage. Sincere, she began, grabbing my wrist as soon as she approached. I impatiently shook her off and said, I told you a week ago, Miss Tiff, you've got the wrong person. Are you suffering from memory loss? Seeing her reminded me of the 4 years of humiliation and pain, filling me with both hatred and anger. Tiffany frowned but held back her temper. She pulled out the jade pendant hanging around her neck and said, Stop lying. The pendant lit up when it saw you, and over the past week, I've been watching you. You like going to that pub on the west side of town. When you're stressed, you head to the basketball court to blow off steam. Your meals are always light, you're allergic to peanuts, and you're left-handed. Don't tell me all of this is just a coincidence. I looked at her expressionlessly and said, Even if you're right, so what? Hearing me admit it, Tiffany bit her lip and said, How can you even ask that? You're my boyfriend. How could you become Victoria's fiancé? How far have you two gone? Don't tell me you've already. Enough, I cut her off. Tiffany, stop with this nonsense. Who the hell is your boyfriend? Who I'm with is none of your business. If you keep acting crazy, don't blame me for slapping some sense into you. Unable to hold back my anger, I interrupted her, turned around and walked away. Tiffany tried to grab me again, but this time I slapped her across the face. Clapping my hands, I called for security. With a thud, 2 guards pinned Tiffany to the ground. Her usually flawless face turned red with humiliation. Sincere. Jordan, are you out of your mind? How dare you treat me like this? Aren't you afraid I'll never speak to you again? I dismissed the guards and walked toward her, looking down coldly as I laughed. What a shame. I've decided to change my target this time, so your threats mean nothing to me now. Tiffany scoffed. I don't believe you. If you could change your target, you would have done it long ago. This is just another one of your games, isn't it? Playing hard to get? I smiled and said, believe what you want. Just stay out of my life, or don't blame me for being ruthless. She was so full of herself that I couldn't be bothered to argue further. Turning away, I got into my car and sped off, leaving Tiffany to eat my exhaust fumes. In the past 4 years, Tiffany had never seen this side of Sincere before. For the first time, she felt a twinge of panic. Could it really be true that he'd moved on to someone else this time? As soon as the thought crossed her mind, she dismissed it. No, she told herself. Just like I said earlier, if Sincere could change his target, he would have done it already. He's just trying to scare me. The usual 6-month strategy period isn't over yet. He's just... Victoria provokes me, just like I used to provoke Ethan in the past. Before the 6-month deadline is up, he'll definitely come crawling back, begging for my forgiveness. The whole playing hard to get shtick is cliché, but I have to admit, Sincere ignoring her while becoming Victoria's fiancé must be unbearable for her. Tiffany dusted off her clothes and muttered, forget it. This time I won't test whether he loves me or not. I'll just make him my boyfriend outright. I'm not getting any younger. I should settle down and start a family. The moment I got home, Tiffany showed up. She said, Sincere, break up with Victoria and come back to me. This time I'll let you be my boyfriend. Marriage is fine too. How about that? I laughed in disbelief and replied, Victoria respects me, likes me, and treats me well. I'm not stupid. Why would I leave her to be with you? She frowned and retorted, don't forget your mission is to win me over. If you get involved with someone else, aren't you afraid my affection score will drop to 0 and you'll end up dying a miserable death? Hearing this, my heart ached involuntarily. I gritted my teeth and shot back. So you do know that the lower your affection score, the more painful my death will be, huh? Tiffany, with an air of self-righteousness, replied, well, you shouldn't have deceived my feelings and had the audacity to flirt with other women. You. I cut her off angrily. Shut up, Tiffany, you're unbelievable. How dare you lecture me? I've had enough. I grabbed her by the neck, overwhelmed with the urge to kill her on the spot. I've tried to win her over 8 times, and not once did she accept me. She's humiliated me time and time again. What am I to her? Just a pathetic lapdog who exists to please her? Watching her struggle to breathe, I suppressed my rage and threw her to the ground. Clutching her reddened neck, her face flushed, she asked, I'll ask you one last time, are you coming back? I enunciated slowly, no. If it weren't for the system's tasks, you wouldn't even be worth a second glance. She bit her lip and declared, Sincere, remember what you said. Before the 6-month deadline is up, you'd better not come crying to me. I didn't even want to respond. I slammed the door shut and called security, saying, send a few guards to escort Tiffany out, and don't let just anyone in here anymore. I don't want to see her at my doorstep ever again. Tiffany was dragged away by the guards, fuming as she bombarded me with a slew of messages. Her texts boiled down to accusing me of playing hard to get. I skimmed through them and replied, wait for me to come find you within 6 months. Just you wait. Then I blocked her. Inwardly, I felt a wave of relief. Thank goodness I switched my target this time. Otherwise, who knows how much more suffering I'd have to endure. I was determined to cut ties with Tiffany once and for all. But the very next evening at a charity gala, I ran into Ethan and Tiffany. While Tiffany was busy chatting with others, Ethan approached me, scrutinizing me from head to toe like I was merchandise. Furious, he sneered, so, Tiffy's got her eye on you now. What makes you so special? I shot him a cold look and replied, stay out of my face, Ethan. Not everyone worships Tiffany like you do. His face twisted with rage. You think I'd believe your crap? I frowned and said, believe it or not, that's your problem. I tried to walk away, but Ethan grabbed me again. Blocking my path, he demanded, why do you people keep clinging to Tiffy, one after another, like vultures? Don't you know the person she loves is me, especially you scumbag. You're engaged to Victoria, yet you're still chasing after someone else. Ethan hurled insults at me, his words growing filthier by the second. My face darkened, and just as I was about to retort, he suddenly collapsed to the ground, splashing himself with wine. He shouted, Jordan, why did you hit me and pour wine on me? What did I do wrong? His outburst drew everyone's attention. Before I could say a word, Tiffany rushed over and helped him up, glaring at me. She snapped, That's enough, Jordan. How dare you treat Eddie like this? Just because you're Victoria's fiancé now doesn't give you the right to bully him. This scene felt eerily familiar. The last time, I was desperately trying to explain myself, but this time, I let out a cold laugh, grabbed a beer bottle from the table, and walked over to Ethan. I poured the beer over his head. Ah! Ethan screamed. Tiffy, he's gone mad! Tiffany's face turned pale. She shoved me away and yelled, Jordan, what are you doing? I smirked. Ethan said I poured wine on him and hit him. Might as well make it true. Without hesitation, I grabbed him by the collar and punched him hard in the face. Ethan was stunned, clutching his face in disbelief. He stood up and exclaimed, See? He's violent. Tiffany held his hand and commanded, Jordan, apologize to Eddie immediately. I stared at her coldly and said, There's one thing I've never understood. How are you so sure I've been bullying him? Without missing a beat, she replied, If it wasn't you, who else would it be? Are you saying he's lying? She added, This is your last chance. Apologize to Eddie, or don't even think about coming back to me. I retorted, Apologize my foot. Miss Tiff, if you're so capable, why don't you keep this attitude in front of the police? Ethan hired 6 men to kidnap Sincere, leading to his death after he jumped from a building. The police already have key evidence. That bracelet, it's been destroyed. But there was still the video evidence saved in the cloud. Over the past month, I had been preoccupied with dealing with Victoria and hadn't had the chance to address Ethan. When I saw Ethan tonight, I immediately called the police and ensured the evidence was sent to the station right away. Tiffany's face turned pale and she retorted, Stop talking nonsense. Sincere brought all this trouble upon himself by getting involved with unsavory people. What does Ethan have to do with it? This time, I didn't even need to respond. A team of police officers walked in and arrested Ethan on the spot. The guests were stunned, filming the scene on their phones. Someone murmured, Ethan always seemed so well-mannered. How could he do something like this? Why not? Remember when he and Miss Tiff forced one of her admirers to run into a burning building to save a dog? That guy died on the spot. It's about time he got caught. Yeah, Ethan bullied Sincere before, and Miss Tiff sided with him. Poor Sincere, the victim, even had to apologize. Where's the justice in that? Another chimed in. Ethan's been tormenting Sincere for a while now, but who would dare speak up? Everyone's afraid of ending up like Sincere, targeted and destroyed by the two of them. Under the weight of the crowd's accusations, Ethan didn't even dare to lift his head. He looked at Tiffany in a panic, trying to explain, Tiff, I didn't. Watching the police take Ethan away, Tiffany tried to stop them but failed. She shot me a glare before rushing after him in frustration. Not long after the police left, Victoria arrived in a flurry. She was out of breath when she reached me and asked, Tiffany and Ethan came to bother you again. It was rare to see such indignation on her face. I nodded. Yeah. Weren't you on a business trip? What brought you back? Victoria had been on an overseas trip, with each leg of the journey taking at least 11 hours. She must have rushed back the moment she landed. Anxiously, Victoria said, I heard they were harassing you. I couldn't rest easy. Let me see, are you hurt? I replied, I'm fine, but Ethan claimed I hit him. Victoria, aren't you afraid I might be lying? She looked at me earnestly. You're my fiancé. Why would I doubt you over a stranger? Besides, I trust your character. You'd never do something like that." Hearing that, I felt completely at ease. A warm feeling spread through my chest. It felt amazing to have someone believe in me. As the one who reported the incident, I needed to sign some paperwork at the police station. Unwilling to leave me alone, Victoria accompanied me. Ethan was already locked up when we arrived, but Tiffany was still lingering in the lobby, looking devastated and shell-shocked. The moment she spotted me, her expression darkened and she stormed over. But Victoria stepped in front of her and asked, "Miss Tiff, what do you want?" I didn't really need Victoria to shield me from another woman, but I had to admit, it felt good to be protected by her. Standing behind Victoria, I watched her take charge. Tiffany snapped, "This has nothing to do with you, Victoria. I need to talk to Jordan. Move aside." She tried to push past Victoria but couldn't. Frustrated, she shouted at me, "Jordan, I honestly didn't know Ethan had hired someone to attack Sincere. But he only did it because Sincere kept targeting him. Ethan acted out of resentment and just wanted to teach him a small lesson. Sure, Ethan made a mistake, but does it really warrant jail time? Why did you have to call the police?" Even now, she was still trying to defend Ethan. Fury surged through me. I didn't care that we were in a police station. I just wanted to shut her up. Before Tiffany could finish her tirade, Victoria slapped her hard across the face. Hands on her hips, she barked, "You're addicted to harassing my fiancé, aren't you?" Tiffany bit her lip, glaring at Victoria. "You don't even know what's going on. Why are you meddling?" Wiping the blood from the corner of her mouth, Tiffany, in a fit of rage, raised her hand, seemingly ready to strike back. I stepped forward, pushing her away. Tiffany looked at me in disbelief, hurt flashing across her face when she realized I was protecting someone else. But I didn't even glance at her. I stood firmly by Victoria's side. Victoria, however, wasn't done. She took another step forward and delivered a second slap to Tiffany's face. "Whatever bullying you've done to others before is none of my business," Victoria said coldly. "But if you think you can throw your weight around and mess with my fiancé in front of me, you're sorely mistaken." The scene turned chaotic, but before things escalated further, the police intervened and separated them. I had no intention of dealing with Tiffany any longer. After signing the necessary paperwork, I pulled Victoria away. "Jordan, wait, I'm not done with you," Tiffany called after me, trying to chase us, but the bodyguards blocked her path. Without looking back, I got into the car with Victoria. As she lowered the window, her gaze frosty, she said, "We're leaving. We don't need your permission, Tiffany. You really think you're some sort of princess, don't you? Let me be clear, we're not letting this go. Don't waste your breath on her," I told Victoria. Turning to the driver, I commanded, "Drive." If Tiffany had ever been reasonable, I wouldn't have suffered so much over the past 4 years. As the car started, Victoria clasped my hand tightly. Her voice trembled as she said, "Don't worry, Jordan. I won't let her get away with this." Hesitating, I asked, "But what if Tiffany comes to you and starts saying all sorts of things about me? Would you still stand by me if something bad happened?" I asked, a hint of worry in my voice. I was concerned that Tiffany might reveal the system tasks to Victoria, fearing she might also think I had ulterior motives and start to despise me. Victoria, however, seemed utterly unfazed. "If I were the type of person to doubt you or treat you harshly because of a few words from someone else, then I wouldn't deserve to be your fiancé," she said calmly. "Thank you, Victoria," I said as I embraced her. "There are indeed a lot of personal grudges between Tiffany and me. Please don't intervene, I'll handle it myself." "All right." She nodded gently, not pressing me for details about our grievances. "Everyone has their secrets, it's normal," she added, nestling into my arms. Her voice softened as she continued, "But if there's anything you can't handle, come to me anytime." "Okay," I replied. Back home, I wasted no time contacting the biggest media outlets in the country. I sent them dirt on Tiffany, along with evidence of design flaws in the cars produced by her family's company. Within an hour, Tiffany and the Shoe Corporation became trending topics. TIFFANYSHUDRIVES8 SUITORSTOTHEIRDEATH. Hashtag Tiffany shoe cover subcrimes of her lover Ethan. Hashtag shoe corporation design flaws in latest car models. Netizens were abuzz. Oh my God, she made someone save a dog from a fire and watched as they burned to death, leaving a critically injured person at a car crash site. That's no different than killing them. Ethan hired people to kidnap a victim, forcing them to jump to their death. And Tiffany still had the nerve to blame the victim? She stole a suitor's car design and gave it to her lover Ethan. Tiffany is shameless. Shoe Corporation is selling defective cars. Are they out of their minds? Refund. The Shoe Corporation's PR team tried to step in, but the scandals were too severe to smooth over with a simple apology. By the end of the day, their stock plummeted, and the company held an emergency shareholder meeting demanding Tiffany's dismissal. No amount of tantrums could save her this time. The losses she had inflicted on the company were incalculable, from the damaged reputation to the recall of faulty cars. Even her father, the chairman, couldn't shield her this time. Tiffany was ousted from the SHU Corporation. As she walked out, employees and passers-by whispered and pointed at her. That's the one who drove several suitors to their deaths. Unbelievable. Right before the holidays, and now our year-end bonuses are gone because of her drama. Rich people really don't see ordinary lives as valuable. Sincere lost his life because of her, and she still defended her precious Ethan. What a piece of work. Tiffany had never felt so disgraced. She could reprimand one or two people, but silencing everyone was impossible. Adding to her fury, she hadn't even resolved the mess with Ethan, and now this. Fuming, she stormed back to her place and angrily called Jordan, but all she got was a busy tone, call after call. "Jordan, you dare block me?" she shouted, both shocked and enraged. It was bad enough he got engaged to Victoria just to spite her, but now he had the audacity to block her and leak her dirt to the media? Did he really think she wouldn't retaliate? Just then, Crystal showed up, worried about Tiffany. "Tiff, are you okay?" she asked cautiously. Tiffany, too furious to respond, snatched Crystal's phone and dialed Jordan again with gritted teeth. But he still didn't pick up. Enraged, Tiffany stormed into the headquarters of the Lou Corporation to confront him. Crystal, uneasy, followed closely behind. I had anticipated Tiffany's reaction when I contacted the media, so I wasn't surprised when she showed up. Not wanting her to cause a scene outside, I had her brought to my office. However, I left Crystal waiting outside. Tiffany slammed her hands on my desk, her voice shrill with anger. "Jordan, who gave you the nerve to leak those things to the media? How dare you?" I leaned back in my chair, my tone calm but cold. "Why not? Everything I said was true. I didn't fabricate anything." "You have some nerve saying that," she snapped. "The designs you gave the company before were flawed. Now, to salvage the brand's reputation, the company has to recall all new car models sold in the past 3 years. Do you have any idea how much damage this will cause?" By the end, her voice had risen to a near scream. Tiffany thought her anger would intimidate me, that I'd rush to explain myself like I used to. But instead, I chuckled and stood up. Grabbing a thick stack of documents, I threw them at her. Then I placed a tablet playing a video into her hands. "Take a good look, Tiffany," I said, my voice dripping with scorn. "See with your own eyes if I ever wronged your precious Ethan." Papers scattered across the floor as the video began to play. Tiffany's face was grazed by the sharp edge of a piece of paper, and she initially wanted to lash out. But the moment her eyes landed on the contents of the paper and the video on her tablet, she froze. Ethan had once asked her to jump into a lake to retrieve a watch, claiming it was a cherished heirloom from his late mother. But it turned out to be a cheap $9.99 knockoff he had bought online. He had deliberately thrown away the pair of rings her mother had left behind, staged his own fall to gain sympathy, and even caused the car accident a year ago by grabbing the steering wheel during an argument. It wasn't anyone else's fault but his own. One revelation after another, clear and undeniable, all painted a picture of Ethan twisting the truth for his own gain. Tiffany had grown up with Ethan. In her memories, he was the gentle, kind-hearted boy who was always bullied and needed protection. So, Every time he claimed that Sincere had wronged him, she believed him without question. She never imagined that Ethan had been deceiving her all along. No wonder Jordan, whose system was designed to make her his target, had always kept his distance. Despite the system punishing him with tragic consequences for failing to win her favor, he still chose to stay away from her. Over the years, Jordan had borne so much blame and endured so much humiliation because of Ethan's lies. If only she had cared enough to ask a few more questions or check the surveillance footage, she would have discovered the truth. But she never did. She had only ever acted on her assumptions, punishing him without a second thought. The sudden flood of truth hit Tiffany like a sledgehammer, leaving her reeling, her worldview shattered. She didn't know what to say or do. Clutching her tablet in her arms and holding the damning documents in her hands, her face turned ashen. Jordan didn't expect an apology from her and scoffed. "Seen enough? Don't ever threaten me with whether or not I'll see you again. I'd be thrilled if you never bothered me again. Just the sight of you makes me sick." Tiffany had never faced such hostility from him before and didn't know how to respond. Before she could even try to say something, Jordan called in a bodyguard. "Show her out," he ordered. Tiffany was practically escorted out of the house. She wanted to find him again to apologize, but she couldn't even get close to him. Victoria made a special trip to warn her. "Miss Tiff, are you still trying to pester my fiancé? Are you finding life a little too easy for yourself?" Tiffany retorted, "What do you mean, your fiancé? He's not." The word fiancé stung her like a thorn. Jordan had always been hers. If she hadn't been deceived by Ethan and done all those things to hurt him, Victoria wouldn't have had the chance to get engaged to him. But before she could finish her sentence, Crystal covered her mouth. Crystal apologized. "Miss Vic, I'm sorry. Tiffy's just under a lot of stress." Victoria frowned. "Next time you do something, Miss Tiff, think about whether you can handle the consequences first." With that, she turned and left. Tiffany shook off Crystal's hand and demanded, "What are you doing?" Crystal replied, "Tiffy, Jordan's never had anything to do with you. Why do you keep chasing after him?" Honestly, if I were Vicky, I wouldn't let anyone pester my fiancé either. Tiffany didn't have the energy to explain everything to her. Frustrated, she snapped, "You don't understand anything. Just you wait. In less than 5 months, Jordan will break up with her and be with me." Right now, she felt immensely grateful that Jordan was bound to the system. Otherwise, she worried he might have walked away from her for good. Crystal hesitated before saying, "Are you under too much pressure lately? Or should I help you schedule an appointment with a psychologist?" Her tone almost made it sound like she was accusing Tiffany of being mentally unstable. Tiffany was furious but didn't want to argue with her. She got in her car and drove off alone. After uncovering the truth of the past 4 years, she wanted to apologize to Jordan, the true victim in all of this, but she couldn't find him. However, she could still confront Ethan, the mastermind behind it all. Tiffany's emotions were a whirlwind of anger, guilt, and regret. The intensity of her feelings made her chest feel like it was about to burst. If she didn't do something soon, she felt like she might explode. Ethan's case hadn't gone to trial yet, and he hadn't been transferred to a detention center. Technically, only his lawyer was allowed to visit him. But Tiffany pulled some strings and managed to see him at the holding facility. Through the bars, Ethan's tear-streaked face lit up when he saw her. "Tiffy, you've come to save me, haven't you?" His eyes, swollen from crying, sparkled with hope. Tiffany responded with disgust. "Don't call me that. It makes me sick just hearing it. Ethan, haven't I been good to you all these years? Why did you twist the truth and treat me like a fool?" "Tiffy, I don't know what you're talking about. Stop the act. I know everything now." She laid out all the evidence she had gathered and said coldly, "The Wands have already called off your engagement. The Shoes will publicly sever all ties with you. And everything I gave you, the mansion, the car, all of it, will be taken back. Don't even think about hiring a good lawyer this time. You'll rot in prison, and when you get out, I won't let you off the hook either." Tiffany couldn't tolerate being deceived, not by anyone. Even Jordan's initial approach, driven by the system's mission, had been hard for her to accept. and she had hated him for it. Now, knowing what Ethan had done, she felt a murderous rage towards him. With every word she said, Ethan's face grew paler, until he was trembling all over, barely able to breathe. "Tiffy, you can't do this to me. I only did it because I love you." Tiffany asked, "You love me so you lied to me? You love me so you went on blind dates?" "I had no choice," Ethan cried. "The Shu family raised me. If I had pursued you, your parents would have hated me. And besides, you didn't even like me. I would have lost everything." Ethan used to just tear up a little, and Tiffany would feel heartbroken for him. Now, as he sobbed uncontrollably, with tears and snot all over his face, all Tiffany felt was disgust. Her expression turned icy as she interrupted him. "Stop making excuses. How did I not see before how selfish and deceitful you are? You want everything, but in the end you'll end up with nothing. Your reputation, your wife, your wealth, it's all gone. And after you get out of prison, your life will be miserable. Don't think your time in prison will be any better." She spat out her words with venom, then turned and walked away. Behind her, Ethan cried out in desperation, his voice breaking as he screamed her name. But Tiffany didn't even look back, not once. She hurried home, her mind racing with ways to apologize to Jordan. He had the system and couldn't leave her, but this time she knew she had gone too far. She needed to show some genuine remorse to avoid breaking his heart completely. At Jordan's place, I kept receiving calls from unknown numbers. I didn't answer them, knowing they were likely from Tiffany. Eventually, I set my phone to automatically block all unknown calls. But for the next month, Tiffany kept sending me courier packages. Sometimes they contained old photos of us, other times gifts I had given her in the past. Inside each package was always a handwritten note from her. "What happened before was my fault. I regret it now. Please come back to me. I'm willing to marry you, have kids with you, and build a life together. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have assumed I could punish you like that. Those punishments have become my nightmares now. I never told you this, but I've always loved you. It's just that when I found out you approached me because of the system, I felt betrayed and lashed out. I've never loved Ethan. I only used him to make you jealous." It was clear Tiffany truly regretted her actions and had realized her mistakes. Otherwise, she wouldn't have humbled herself to this extent. I unblocked her number and called her. She answered almost immediately, her voice trembling with excitement. "Does this mean you forgive me? I'll come pick you up right now." "Tiffany," I said calmly, "I only called to tell you that there's no chance for us anymore. I'm Victoria's fiancé now. We're getting married." Her voice turned frantic. "You're still mad at me, aren't you? You're lying to punish me. I'm your target, your mission." "Not anymore," I cut her off sharply. "Please don't bother me again, or you'll regret it." Tiffany was nearly disowned by her family and plagued by scandal. If she agreed to let go, I'd consider us even. But Tiffany had never been one to give up easily. "You can't just change your target like that," she insisted. "You're just saying this to hurt me. I'll prove my sincerity to you. I didn't know how to love before, but I can change. Tell me what to do and I'll do it, okay?" Her voice broke into a near plea. Tiffany had always been like this, lost in her own world, oblivious to how others felt. I didn't want to waste any more words on her, so I hung up. In reality, if she waited just 4 more months, she'd know I'd truly changed my mission target. But after that call, Tiffany started following me everywhere, even trying to stir up trouble with Victoria. My patience was completely gone. I summoned the system. "System," I said, "you mentioned the compensation from the main system has arrived and can grant me 1 wish, correct?" "Yes, host," it replied. "Then bind Tiffany to a mission system and assign her to target the second son of the Bates family." The system confirmed, "The second son of the Bates family? Confirming submission of your wish." I nodded. "Yes. Make sure she starts with a disadvantaged background but still has a beautiful face. The Bates heir is short, ugly, fat, violent, and unfaithful. Targeting him will be pure torment." I think it's time Tiffany experienced the kind of suffering I've endured for the past 4 years. Only then will she understand that forgiveness is impossible. The system repeated my words, then asked for final confirmation. Host, do you confirm the submission of your wish? Confirm. Submit. As I finished speaking, Victoria pushed the door open and walked in. She looked at me curiously. What's making you so happy? I smiled and responded, just thinking about how lucky I am to have such an amazing fiancé. I wasn't lying. Every time Tiffany acted out, it made me even more grateful for someone like Victoria. Victoria wrapped her arms around me, her eyes warm and filled with joy. I'm lucky to have you too. Tonight, some friends are hosting a welcome back party. Will you come with me? Of course, I replied. I went to the closet to pick out an outfit and settled on a black suit. But as I was about to change, Victoria stopped me. I looked at her, confused. She bit her lip and said, I don't have a dress that matches black. Surprised, I chuckled. Miss Vic, are you suggesting we wear matching outfits? Her cheeks flushed as she hugged me, resting her head against my chest. Would that be okay? She asked softly, almost playfully. It would be an honor, I said, smiling. In the end, I chose a deep navy suit and we attended the party together. Her friends teased her endlessly. Victoria's got a boyfriend? Wow, this is serious. I've never seen Victoria wear matching outfits with anyone. She's totally marking her territory. Victoria didn't deny their teasing. She just smiled and held onto my arm. After everyone finished teasing her, they turned to me, praising my designs and taste. Victoria's friends were just like her, polite, considerate, and respectful. It was clear how much she valued and respected me, and I couldn't be more grateful for her. Her friends were exceptionally friendly to me. I quickly bonded with them and even exchanged contact information with several of them. Midway through the banquet, the sound of fireworks exploding echoed continuously. Vibrant, colorful fireworks burst right outside the floor where we were, painting the sky in a dreamy spectacle. A group of us stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows with glasses of wine, admiring the view. I was so mesmerized that I didn't notice when I was gently nudged to the front of the group. As the fireworks ended and I turned around, I saw Victoria, who at some point had changed into a stunning white gown. Holding the hem of her dress, she softly asked, Jordan, will you marry me? The union between the Jordan and Victoria families had been arranged long ago, and we had already held our engagement ceremony. I had been planning to propose to Victoria myself, but had been outmaneuvered by her. Smiling, I nodded and pulled her into my arms, slipping onto her finger the diamond ring I had prepared in advance. Amid the cheers and applause around us, I leaned down and kissed her. Victoria was overjoyed and drank quite a bit. By the time we were ready to leave, she could barely walk straight. Sighing softly, I crouched in front of her and removed her high heels. With one hand holding her shoes and the other carrying her in my arms, I bid farewell to everyone and took her downstairs, placing her in the car. Even after returning home, I felt as though I was walking on air. Everything seemed so surreal. I kept glancing in her direction, and each time she responded by holding me tighter. No words were needed. When our eyes met, it was as though the affection between us materialized, enveloping the space we shared. Carrying her upstairs, I brought her to the bathroom. Victoria, I said, the holidays are coming and the housekeeper is on leave. It's not convenient for me to help you wash up. You'll have to do it yourself. I'll be waiting outside. If you need anything, just call for me. The softness in my arms had my thoughts straying, and my eyes brimmed with emotion, but I restrained myself. I didn't look where I shouldn't, nor did I do what I shouldn't. After all, she treated me so well, and I wanted to respect her. But just as I was about to close the door, Victoria tugged at me, her voice sweet enough to make one's heart melt. Jordan, she said, join me. You're drunk, I replied. I'm perfectly sober, she countered. Victoria didn't give me a chance to refuse. She wrapped her arms around my shoulders and kissed me. Stumbling, we ended up in the bathroom, where the shower was accidentally turned on, drenching our clothes. My self-control stretched to its limit, my veins taut with tension. But I stopped once again, looking into her eyes and asking, "Victoria, are you sure?" "Yes," she whispered. I hesitated no longer. In the midst of her soft murmurs, I discovered for the first time that the cold, reserved Victoria, who usually carried herself with such poise, could be so unrestrained, so bold. Amid the haze of that moment, a mechanical voice echoed in my mind, "Ding! Congratulations, host, on successfully completing the task. The system will now disengage. Wishing the host a lifetime of peace and happiness." Tiffany's story. Tiffany had always believed that even if she made mistakes, the system would give her a chance to win Jordan back. That was until she was forcibly bound to the system with a new target to pursue, Chester. Everyone knew Chester was a violent, womanizing playboy who reveled in tormenting others. From the depths of her soul, Tiffany despised men like him. The thought of pursuing him was repugnant. Unlike Jordan, she had no intention of complying, and no one, not even the system, could force her. She thought she'd rather fail the mission and face death, but Tiffany was quickly proven wrong. The very day she was bound to the system, Chester harassed her, and she rejected him outright. As a result, his favorability rating for her dropped into the negatives. This caused her health points to plummet, leaving her writhing in pain on the floor. She went to the hospital, took painkillers, but nothing alleviated the agony. Unable to endure, she swallowed her pride and sought out Chester. However, the moment she saw his lecherous, smug face, she vomited on the spot. Caught between the unbearable pain and the loathing she felt, Tiffany couldn't stop thinking about ending Chester's life to escape this torment. But the system forbade hosts from killing their targets, directly or indirectly. With no way out, Tiffany attempted suicide, hoping to escape the nightmare. But to her horror, she revived immediately after. Lacking the courage to try again, she had no choice but to return to Chester. For the first time, Tiffany understood the humiliation and torment of being someone's pawn. Yet no matter how much she hated it, she had to suppress her emotions and continued trying to please him. And Jordan? Did he feel this same pain during the 4 years he spent by her side? Tiffany's heart ached at the thought and filled with regret for how she had treated him. Even when she learned that Jordan had orchestrated her binding to Chester, she couldn't bring herself to hate him. She realized she had gone too far in the past. On the day Jordan married Victoria, Ethan was sentenced to 13 years in prison, and Tiffany was set to face her first termination due to mission failure. Before her death, she went to see Jordan one last time. "I know I wronged you in the past," she said. "Even though I've fallen for you, and everything I did was a mistake, it's too late to say sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life in regret and won't bother you anymore. Can you help me unbind from the system?" Jordan looked at her coldly. "I don't have the authority to unbind you." With that single sentence, he sealed Tiffany's fate. For the rest of her days, she would remain trapped in the agony of pursuing Chester until the day he died.